Hi, I'm Anthony, and today I'm going to be talking to Terry Brown. Uh, he is the Director of Engineering at GSK. So, welcome, Terry.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Tell me a bit about what you're doing at GSK and what your role is in the company as a whole.
Yeah. So I've been at GSK now for 16 months and joined as a kind of engineering lead for part of a sort of cross-functional product engineering team. And we're trying to deliver digital products really for GSK that either have a direct benefit to patients or to healthcare practitioners, providers. And as a sort of sideline to that, we're also involved a little in conversations around the current transformation. As you can imagine, all orgs are going through transformations, and GSK is not immune to that. So they're going through both a digital and agile and a cultural transformation as well. So we're helping wherever we can with that. In terms of kind of products and things like that we work on, primarily at the moment, we're working on a vaccines sales system, so helping get the vaccines that GSK create out from the supply chain out through into hospitals, vaccines centers, pharmacies, things like that. So yeah,
right now.
Yeah, incredibly busy, and it's this is the first non-tech company I've worked in, so really interesting to be part of a pharma company at a time like this. It's seeing the sort of evolution of the pandemic from inside, and our sort of company's response to that is fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
So, you've worked from home a lot in the past. Can you tell me about what's happening at GSK right now in terms of work from home and remote working?
Yeah, I mean, I think GSK has not really had a sort of remote working policy, I don't think. I've spoken to a lot of people across GSK. As you can imagine, GSK is a global enterprise, 100,000 plus employees. And I've certainly spoken to pockets of people who are remote, but it's certainly not the norm. They definitely have flexible working, but it's not the norm. And when our team were brought on board 16 months ago, the CTO called us an acqui-hire. So she brought the whole team in. They'd previously worked primarily at Salesforce, though a couple of stragglers like myself. And I'm based up in the northeast of England, just east of Newcastle. So it was an opportunity to work on something really purposeful. I mean, working this close to, the work on HIV, on pharma products, things like that's huge. But I just couldn't have done that, not remotely. But the good thing is there were a number of the team, so 8 of us, 9 of us now, were remote. So I think the company still adapts to it, but obviously with it being a global company, by the very nature, everything you do is a remote interaction. I'm talking to US colleagues all the time. I'm talking to colleagues elsewhere. Our co-located team are based down in an office in London as well. So remote is fairly normal, but not remote as all employees sitting out kind of thing.
Okay, so GSK already has some practices and some processes in place when you joined.
Yeah, I think we've evolved them. I don't think I really understood. Very flexible in terms of how you work, and the focus is very much on kind of getting the job done as opposed to, monitoring your attendance at a seat and things like that. But no, I think what our team have done is probably evolved our own practices around that. Obviously, still very aligned with what GSK are doing, and GSK have a set of values and expectations, so very much aligned with those. But we've evolved our own kind of cultural approaches, processes, things like that just work well for us.
So let's delve into that a little bit. So what challenges did you have when you wanted to introduce these processes?
I think we've been really lucky. we didn't struggle too much with anything other than that usual kind of Tuckman, forming teams, the whole forming, storming, norming, performing kind of thing. That was obviously, we were building up a team of 22 people, some of whom knew each other, some of whom didn't. I was new to the majority of the team. So those sort of things and building up relationships, they were, as you can imagine, in remote is challenging. And I was new to remote at the time. I was very, very nervous when I joined GSK about becoming a remote employee. I hadn't really done it in my previous employer. We were all co-located, so I've had 16 months of experience of it. But thankfully, I think because we were able to build that culture from the ground up and talk about it, and there were no pressures on us on that kind of first month or two, was we really bottomed out what good looked like for us. I definitely underestimated the impact of face-to-face, though. There's nothing like it, and we do get together periodically, but if you're building relationships, especially if you're a line manager and you're trying to build a relationship, trying to build trust, things like that, you can do so over video, but I don't think there's any replacement for the face-to-face. So I think the learning experiences have been really around that.
Okay, so what other communication tools do you use? I mean, a lot of the world is using Slack or Microsoft Teams, but what other tools are you using?
So I think GSK tend to use Teams. They have Workplace for, obviously, as you can imagine, at an enterprise level, finding out what's going on in other parts of the business is incredibly difficult, but Workplace is brilliant for that. We as a team use Slack for messaging. Obviously, we use Teams when we're interacting with the business, but for our own internal work, we use Slack. We were using Zoom until the recent debacle with the security. So that is understandably now banned at GSK. So we are now using Teams for video, which is a shame because it's nowhere near as good a product for video, but it works. It does what it needs to do.
Have you heard of Amazon Chime?
No, I haven't. No.
Recently only came across that. It's quite nice. It's a Zoom-esque experience, I guess.
Okay. Oh, fab. I'll chat to the team about that then, because I know Microsoft are working on getting more active faces in the call, and I think they're going to 9 soon, and then more afterwards. But when you're on a daily, yeah, 4 is not enough. Yeah.
Zoom has, I think, 50.
Yeah, 49 active faces, but little things as well, like the ability to raise your hand with a button and things like that. It's just fab. It's such a nice product.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, we're using Zoom at Radley Elder, and it's just been revolutionary. When we first introduced it, it was literally the week before the crisis started, and the owner of the company said, "Hey, why aren't we using this for everything?" And and then we had to.
It's nice when things get good products like that get mandated, which is great. I think one of the things I hadn't used it before joining GSK, but the team from Salesforce obviously had, because it's a Salesforce product, but there's a product called Quip, which is around, I think of it like a Office 365 type thing for document co-creation, and it's phenomenally good. When multiple people are working on the same document, I've not worked on anything like it. Office 365, Google, any of their offerings, it's seriously good. So we still use that, and that gets so much activity every day. It's brilliant.
Gone are the days of emailing Word documents around with track changes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, you'd like to think they were. They should feature a lot less. Yeah.
Well, I guess when you have external people that don't have access to your organization account, then
yeah, for sure.
So, what other tools are you using then for remote working?
I think that's primarily it. So Slack for chat, for video, Teams. as I say, workplace is great as a wider sharing, letting people know what we're working on and also finding out what others are working on. GSK uses Office 365 for email and things like that as well. I think that's probably it. I mean, certainly the engineers are, they're using things like code and things like that, but just the standard engineering tool set, I would think.
Yeah. One of the issues that was raised a few weeks ago was for us was it's great that individual departments and teams are communicating and being able to see each other on video, but how do you interact with people that are outside of your department? I remember chatting to you on LinkedIn, and you recommended the Watercooler.
Yeah, and I love that, and certainly inside of our department, it works brilliantly, and yourself, and for co-located teams as well. The idea of somebody getting up just to make a cuppa and you end up having a sort of impromptu chat, or it literally is the water cooler in some offices, and you miss that remotely. So yeah, we set up at the time Zoom. We haven't replaced it yet, unfortunately, but at the time Zoom, and just a room that was open all day, with little reminders in Slack twice a day to remind people it was there, because it's easy to forget. And it was really, actively used at the times of day that we recommended it. So I think the thing, and it's probably more so during the pandemic, but certainly as a remote employee is connection. Connection is everything. Keeping that context, keeping connected to the individuals is huge. So everything you can do to maximize that is super important.
Yeah. Where I keep telling people that we shouldn't be just sending Slack messages, because it's very easy to misinterpret text and misinterpret the intention of a text message, or even if you do a call on Slack, if you don't have video, then what you end up doing is having a clumsy conversation. So being able to see someone, you can see their facial expressions, hand movements, gestures, and like a huge part of communication is actually seeing people, and it just makes things so much smoother to be able to see people and to have that human interaction. So yeah, day-to-day Slack messaging isn't the same as just chatting to someone at the water cooler or the coffee machine.
Yeah, and we so our engineers will mostly on tasks pair up or mob up on them as well, and they'll jump on video and they'll interact as they're solving the problems for that very reason. It doesn't matter, and I like to think sometimes I can communicate quite well from the written word perspective, and I can easily introduce a lack of context in there that somebody else could misinterpret. So it's you and I having this conversation. You can see we're both smiling, we're both engaged. It makes such a difference. And in remote, it's always important to assume good intent anyway. Even if you get a message that you think, oh, there's something perhaps there, rather than going with that like amygdala hijack and reacting quickly, just checking in with that person and just saying, that felt like you were saying this, can we have a chat about it? And it 99 times out of 100, you absolutely can clarify that, but face-to-face really helps.
Yeah, it's also helpful, I find, when it may sound a bit strange, but you can actually notice people more on video. So in a live setting, if I was sitting across the table from someone, it's rude to stare, let's say. But when you're on video, you're actually looking at the screen, and you can actually. There are some points where I notice more facial expressions from people. I can look at the screen, and I can notice if someone is a little bit upset about something. Whereas if I was in a room, I may not have noticed that expression. So I think in some ways the video gets us a little bit more empathetic and
Yeah.
a little bit more connected, because we are able to actually concentrate on people's expressions and how they feel about conversations.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why with Zoom, I love the multiple video, because you know yourself if you're in a tech meeting or in a daily or something like that, you'll have a few voices and there'll be people quiet, but actually being able to see those people, you're absolutely right. You can interpret that. You can check in with them afterwards if they've seemed quiet. It adds so much, massively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you take anything, or did you take anything for granted when going into remote working?
That's a really good question. I assumed it would all be hard. I think I came at it assuming I perhaps wouldn't enjoy it. I love co-location. I was very lucky in my previous organization. There were 12 of us. We were all based in a single office. And much as I'm an introvert, I love being in the space with other people. So I assumed it was all going to be hard. And I think because of that, and because the team were just forming, we deliberately spent time on the things that some teams perhaps do take for granted. So, building up an effective culture, building up a mechanism for really good feedback where people know it's kind of an ongoing, and, little things like that are the difference between just a regular team and a high performing team. We almost deliberately overcompensated for in the early days, and we still focus on them now, but I think it really helped that we focused more on the culture than the work, I think, from day one. And it makes it easier to focus on the work now because you've established a lot of those norms.
Okay. So what did you overcompensate for, and why?
So for me, it was the human connection. So in the previous org, because you were there kind of face to face with people every day, I would have one-to-ones once a month, and that worked quite well with the team, and that the cadence was something they were happy with. I knew being more distant, it wasn't good enough just to see somebody's face on a daily, for example. So I have one-to-ones weekly now. And I deliberately, in those early days, did more check-ins than that, just to try and maximize that relationship. You can't in any team do anything without trust. And you can't, it feels like overcompensating, but you really can't do enough to try and maximize that base, because you can work from anything if you've got trust in place. So more of it was around trying to maybe artificially create the feel that you would have if you were co-located, just by spending a lot more time together. And I think that's been true since lockdown as well. With COVID, we would do a lot of really nice cultural things, like we have a gaming Friday afternoon, for example, where we play Pictionary together and things. But we now do those twice a week, because again, you can't overcompensate for that potential disconnect, for the human sort of anxieties that are abound at the moment. So yeah, it's maybe overcompensating isn't the right word, but yeah.
I totally agree. Because it is very easy to not communicate with someone, or some people, and the people that are typically quiet in the office, in an office space, you would get less communication with them, even if you were physically near them. So being remote, where everyone is isolated now, it's challenging, and you do have to remember, as a manager or a line manager, you have to be more active, and maybe even set yourself calendar reminders to communicate with people on a cadence.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you and I both work in tech. Technologists, and I know this is a broad brushstroke, but tend to be introverts, tend to be quite quiet. So maximizing on, whatever you can do to keep those people connected is it'll pay dividends in terms of the outcomes from the work for sure.
Yeah. One of the things I've been interested in recently is, it's become a bit of a topic everywhere, but mental health and being isolated is quite challenging. I was saying before that my home is comfortable, but it doesn't feel right in some ways working all the time, because I don't really have the disconnect um, of going to a place to work and then walking home and then coming home, and this is my uh, my fortress of solitude. I'm kind of here all the time, and being isolated and not having the people that I work with to talk to kind of feels a bit weird, surreal. So yeah, I can imagine this getting quite problematic with people that dealing with remote working in long periods of time.
Yeah. I gave a talk on remote working a few weeks ago, and that was absolutely one of the key pieces of advice. And I think we perhaps underestimate the effect of having our home, having our sanctuary, and having that demarcation between work and our private life. And in fairness, when I first joined GSK, I wasn't very good at it, even though I've got an office in the house, and I could leave the room and then I was out of the office kind of thing. I wasn't switching off, and it's incredibly impactful. And I've seen lots of pictures on Twitter and things of people's home offices where they're sitting on the sofa with the laptop or something like that, and it's, so long as you can take work away at the end of the day and absolutely be disciplined about it and say, okay, well, it's 5 p.m. or it's 5:30 p.m. or whatever, I'm done. I need to separate that and I need to be back in my house now. It's super important. Blurring the lines is always dangerous.
Yeah. I actually have a ritual at the end of the day, even though the end of the day kind of varies every single day, which I need to fix. But my ritual is packing up my laptop, mouse, keyboard, mouse pad, and headset, etc., in the same exact way, and putting everything on the laptop in a certain order all the time, and then taking the laptop and putting it underneath the coffee table, out of sight. That way, that's my signal that I'm no longer working. And interestingly, because I've packed it in such a I wouldn't say intricate, but it's such a neat way that I've packed it, I have no motivation to unpack it. So it's having that ritual at the end of the day and at the beginning of the day, signifying start and end of work, is quite important. It really makes a difference.
I think discipline it is one of the things that I certainly struggled with in the early part of being remote, and it makes a massive difference. And that sounds like a brilliant, having a structured ritual like that. It's almost like, right, we're shutting the shop, we're done for the day, and we can go off and enjoy ourselves, kind of thing. And that's massively important.
Yeah, I know some people that go for walks before and after work. So actually walking in the morning is quite healthy anyway. It gets the blood pumping. But going for a walk after work as well is something that I'm actually probably going to start doing.
Yeah. And I know there's a Q&A thing going on here, but do you folks talk about mental health in the workplace? I think that's because I'm super passionate about mental health as well, as a person who has struggled most of his adult life with mental health issues and with suicide. I talk about it a lot, but I talk about it a lot to make sure it's safe to talk about, kind of thing. So my team would be entirely knowledgeable that I'm the person who talks about that sort of thing, to try and make it as safe as possible. Do you folks have conversations around that and around mental health?
I think it's becoming more accepted everywhere. I mean, growing up in the Western world, I'm from Australia but live in the UK now. It's kind of been frowned upon to talk about one's mental health. And that's a real shame because a lot of people are suffering silently, and they don't feel comfortable about talking about it, and even to the extent where they won't even seek out a counselor because they're just not comfortable talking about it. And I think having a drive now in society where this is now becoming hopefully normal soon. I mean, it's not normal yet, but it's but being able to talk about it is just talking about it is its own therapy.
Yeah, and there's loads. I do little bits and pieces of work with a suicide charity called Papyrus, which is around prevention of teenage suicide, and actually just using that word, being actually okay to talk about the word suicide, being okay to talk about mental health. You're absolutely right. It takes the stigma away and it makes it safe. Because you can, and I've never been anything but a person who's at work all the time. You know, I'm present, even when I've had issues with my mental health, and the performance doesn't change. You can be high performing and have mental health condition. So just making it safe to talk about is the key thing there for sure.
I actually read an article recently about mental health with developers, and the crux of it was essentially like developers are in a zone for so long mentally that it affects other parts of their brain. And it's kind of like going to the gym and only working out your biceps. You're going to look a little silly and probably cause yourself some physical structural damage. But developers are like that with their brains. We spend the whole day exercising this one part that it throws off other parts of the brain. That was the crux of the article. So it's really important to exercise those other parts of the brain and just have breaks even. Do you notice any moods throughout the day?
I used to do a lot of kind of checking in with myself, and I got out of the habit of doing it, and it's fascinating. So since lockdown, I was, and my team would tell you, I was very active in checking in on them. So how are they doing? How is everybody getting on? How are you feeling? All of that sort of thing. And I almost lost checking in on myself a little. And it was, goodness, maybe 2 weeks ago. I was multitasking, as I do very badly. Hit reply on an email. It was a reply all, and I said something far too direct, and the person who I was being direct to saw it, and it wasn't a big deal. It was an apology and move on kind of thing. But I spent the day and I was a mess, and I realized my kind of resilience levels had dropped a little because I hadn't been checking in on myself. So I always make sure at the start of a day and at the end of a day, as your ritual of putting the laptop away, I always check in on myself. How am I feeling? What's going on? And I've done a lot of studying around emotional intelligence, because I used to have an awful lot of amygdala hijacks. I used to be a pain in the butt to work with a few years ago. So I've become a lot closer to emotional intelligence now, and just recognizing my own triggers around that's something that's probably frustrated me. So I need to check in on myself. And so I do that a lot more now, for sure. And it makes you a little more acutely aware of those little fine changes with regard to mood. And you can see it in other people as well. You know what normal looks like in your teams. You know how buoyant somebody is, you know how much they talk. So, you know, just a little bit of reduction in the noise level from that person, or, you know, you start to recognize patterns as well. But it's all about being connected to those people.
So do you think the remote working has made that easier or more difficult?
Definitely more difficult. Yeah. You're relying on tells, but you're not there the whole time. So if a person's fine in the daily and, you know, they seem okay in Slack, there's not always an indicator. One-to-ones are great for that, but we're a much wider team than that, and you can start to pick up things on a wider team. So yeah, when you were co-located, when everybody was in the same space, so much easier. You saw the quiet because it played out through a day. Definitely.
When everyone was still working in offices, one of the things that I tended to do was when I didn't have time to have actual interactions with specific people, I would ask other people, how is that person going? What they're currently working on. Do you find that you're doing that when you're working remote very often, or do you set time to actually talk to those people?
Yeah, I try to deliberately check in with the person. If I've got any thoughts that something might not be right, I'll try and deliberately check in with the person. And certainly are we quite lucky? I'm not sure. We measure how people are feeling once a week. So we use a tool called 15.5, and there's a lot of that sort of tool available, but there's like a weekly pulse. So not only do you say kind of what's gone well this week and what you hope to do next week, but we do a check-in every week on your mental health. And we do a check-in every week on how you're feeling about work. So they act as really active trigger points as well. So even if you've missed a few situations during the week, most often than not, you'll pick something up from those as well. And those weekly one-to-ones, especially now, one-to-ones used to have some structure. So you'd be talking about personal development, or you'd be talking about, their own growth or anything like that. Whereas now every single one-to-one I have, the first check-ins are like, how are you? How are your family? How are your energy levels? How are your stress levels? Just to try and make sure that we have that really close touch point at least once a week.
Seems more personal now than what would have been in the office.
Yeah. I think it again, it's perhaps this overcompensation. You would have taken something like that for granted if you were all co-located, whereas now it's got to be very deliberate because of that slight disconnection of not being in the same physical space, I suppose.
So speaking of the same space, how do you replicate something like going to the pub after work?
It's not easy, though this week is really pertinent because we've just picked up this vaccines sales product, and the team are working brilliantly even through lockdown. They're showing incredibly resilient approach. So this week we've just given everybody some money to get some either alcohol or a soft drink of their choosing. And when we come together on Friday afternoon, we'll be drinking that alcohol. So I got a nice bourbon to make myself an old fashioned, and the whole team have got money to do that. So virtually, we're not too bad. We've got those, as I say, we play games twice a week together to try and create that connection. We also do something, and there's a great product for Slack called Donut, which randomly pairs people up, which is fab. So we have weekly donuts, which are literally 30 minutes of one-to-one with a person where you talk about anything but work. You talk family, you talk, anything else. And we do come together physically once a quarter. So we'll review objectives and key results and plan out the next quarter. But we have a lot of fun while we're doing that as well. But obviously at the moment, that's a little more limited, of course.
So assuming we weren't in lockdown, how often would you physically gather, like really physically gather?
So a general policy for the team is if you, throughout a quarter, if you want to come down to the office and work in the office and work with people there, then you can do. It's supported and obviously funded. Formally, we come together once a quarter and do that kind of review of the previous quarter, plan of the next. Some people will come maybe once, twice a quarter, but we have a number of people with young families as well. So for those, perhaps less so. Myself, I'm I've got the best of all worlds, I suppose. All my kids are teenagers now, so being able to travel is fine. So I guess in the past year, I would say I've probably been in the London office 20 times, and I've been over to our Philadelphia office 4 times. So I'm quite lucky that I do still get that kind of face-to-face contact as well.
Oh, that sounds great. Free trip to Philadelphia.
It sounds more exotic than it is. It's essentially you're in an office, so it's an office with a longer commute. It sounds exotic, but yeah, living out of a hotel is a bit pants.
That is.
Yeah,
that is true, especially if you're stuck in a pretty bland hotel.
Yeah, but I did get to run the Rocky Steps the last time I was over in Philadelphia, so that was a high point.
Right. So just realizing that we're a little bit over time,
no worries.
we can finish up with a little bit of advice. What would be the most important thing that you would say to other companies that are trying to do remote working and forced to do remote working now, actually? But yeah, what would be the most important bit of advice?
I think there's 2 things that jump immediately to mind. One is default to trust. So I think trust is the basis of all high performance, and that's not to say let things go under the carpet. You obviously have to deal with issues as and when you have them, but default to trust, default to a position where you didn't hire idiots. So one would hope that they're actually there doing their best for the company, and if you know they're not, then obviously you deal with that separately. But trust is super important. So defaulting to that I think is really important. Bums on seats was never a good measure of productivity anyway. So co-location, yeah. And I think the other one, and it's more for leaders, really, for people managers, and it's kind of switch that mindset of sort of hierarchical leadership. So I'm in a position further up the food chain than you, so I have power. Well, I don't. I do nothing for the business. It's the people underneath me that do something for the business. So defaulting to servant leadership, and actually recognizing that the people who are my direct reports are the people adding the value, and it's my job to help amplify that and unblock them and do anything I can, but it's ultimately they're the value creators. So I think those 2, massive difference.
Yeah, I totally agree. I always tell my teams that I'm not there to be their boss. They are the boss of themselves, and they're the ones actually doing the work. I'm just there to help. So as you said, I'm an unblocker, and totally agree that this becomes more poignant when people are remote, because companies in the past didn't trust people working remotely. They had to see them working physically. Now that everyone's forced to work from home, that you have to default to trust. I mean, what other choice do you have if everyone's forced to work from home? And also, the leaders can't be a bottleneck now or an approval gate, because the communication is slower. So you have to actually start delegating a responsibility, approval, and give your teams the actual authority to approve themselves.
100%. Yeah, for sure. And I think all of that is it almost changes how you look at the work. You're not then measuring somebody being in the office. You're measuring the outcomes. You're measuring what we did as a team this week. How did we get through our work? How did we solve the problems we were trying to solve? And it just changes the mindset about how you're measuring what's going on in the team. Definitely.
Yeah. I guess one of the important things is to actually have a weekly goal or a monthly goal or a fortnightly goal, and to measure performance against what everyone is expecting the outcome to be.
Yeah, we do quarterly measurement from an OKR perspective, so roughly what that next quarter, what's super important, and that lets everybody know not only what's important but what they can say no to as well. But we also, we absolutely do weekly kind of goal setting, and the engineers do that themselves. So they'll say, this week we hope to know this, or we hope to have this done. And that's not beating people with sticks. That's them saying, this is what good would look like this week. And at least it just starts a conversation, which is brilliant. That's exactly where you want to be.
Yeah. If you don't have a destination in mind and you don't know what good looks like, well, how are you succeeding as a company?
Yeah, there's a fantastic quote by Elon Musk on this, who's gone off the rails slightly recently, but he talks about people, an organization being the sum of its vectors. So if you and I were in the same organization and we're both a force of 8, but we're running in different directions, we're canceling each other out. So actually having that North Star, knowing which direction you're running in together, then we become multipliers, we become additive. So I've always loved that quote as a real sort of visual indicator that we could easily cancel each other out if we had no idea where we were going.
Yeah, organizational processes are quite fascinating to me, and I see this quite a lot in companies where you have some really good motivations on one side, and as you said, some canceling factors due to processes maybe from a different department could be canceling your efforts because that, for instance, something from the IT department not allowing certain types of communications, for instance, or the finance department having control over certain types of budgets and what you're allowed to spend money on.
Yeah, it's easy to create friction in doing the right thing. Yeah.
Great. So it's been just over 40 minutes. So I think we should call it there. Thank you, Terry, for your time.
No worries.
And
that was really good fun. I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, I enjoyed it as well. So everyone, Terry Brown from GSK, the Director of Engineering.
Thank you, folks. Cheers.
Bye.